Welcome to 2024. You have now almost caught up with me. Spring seemed to come early after the little snow we had received had quickly melted away. This being a Q&A, I want to take the opportunity to ask one of my own questions first, one that also some of you have expressed interest in. Did I end up planting a lot of bulbs for the benefit of the mouse population, or did something colorful happen in my garden? Well, here you go. There's a varied mix of flowers. Some like the tulips and the first of the 500 muscari are only emerging. Some like the bluebells will come later in the spring. Some like the different alliums as late as summer. It was, I dare say, a success. But you animal lovers, do not fret over the mice. They have had their best year yet, even without the bulbs. For with the greenhouse, I had created Mouse Heaven, the new Jerusalem of Mickey and Minnie. I thought using leaves as decomposing insulation was a brilliant idea, as did the mice. Oh, how they burrowed, how they rejoiced, how they feasted in the easily accessible warm place with fresh greens and fruit on the other side. Tomato salad, jarred chilies, nothing went unnibbled, nothing went untasted, nothing went undevoured. They even took down lemons, ate the peel, and munched an entire bell pepper in a single night. I lost so much in so little time that like a dark dread the word rats appeared in my dreams. But not enough, oh no, while I was gone forth to honest labour, and while they felt safe from my increasing ire, they peeled the bark off the fig tree, ate every leaf bud and the setting figs. Woe to you creatures of the rodent kind! Forth and fear the light! Arise, gardeners! Arise, practitioners of permaculture! Fell deeds awake! Cheese shall be shaken! Apples shall be splintered! A trap day! A red day! Ere the sun rises! And thus the peace ended, and the war began. Which I lost. And as to mourn my defeat, the weather changed, and after a warm and mostly dry winter, the snow did come, heavy and perilous. The greenhouse survived its first real test, I'm happy to say, and the mice too, I'm sure, commended my engineering. Though their verdict may still be out for winters as of old, my neighbor Romano recalled a February 52 years ago when the snow load was so great that it broke many lose, the stone slabs on the roofs, in the region. Maybe as things are going we won't have to expect winters like those anymore, but still, there were casualties of the heavy, wet spring snow that now thrice has bowed and humbled the trees to the ground. But while the chainsaw restores order, let us get to the reason for this video. First, I want to thank you all. I never expected this series to do as well as it did, and it means a lot that so many gave me something very precious, their time, and their willingness to hear me out as I formulated my thoughts. I also want to thank you for the comments, both those of appreciation and those that expressed a difference of opinion, yet in a charitable way. The internet can be a rough place, but I found the audience of these videos to be mature and considerate. So with these words of praise, let us go to the Q&A, after a word from today's sponsor, Athletic Beans. Well, they are beans. I don't know how athletic beans are, but did you know that nutrition experts from the North Dakota State University recommend adults to consume 25 to 38 grams of fiber a day? I bet you didn't. Neither did I before Google told me. And who would have thought that North Dakota State University comes up right on top when you research nutrition facts on beans? Well, it is not a surprise really if you consider that North Dakota produces 1/3 of all dry beans in the US. Another thing I did not know. Did you? And 100 grams of beans contain 10% of your daily need of vitamin C. They are really tiny little lemons, if lemons had a lot less vitamin C. But if we talk fiber or potassium, beans are bringing it. So have some beans every now and again, if you like beans, or if you like North Dakota. I'm not sure about North Dakota. I think you should not have a capital named after a German chancellor. I mean, what's next? A town called Merkel? Scratch that. Google just told me there actually is a city called Merkel in Texas. I don't know if they have any beans though, but okay. That is more on beans or North Dakota than you probably came here for. So on to the questions. Let us get the big one out of the way. Many have asked or suggested or requested or even pleaded that episode 12 not be the end. What to say? I think these 12 episodes, like a year, are a rounded thing. A line drawn to be a clean circle has to end where it began. Which is maybe a subliminal message that if you like the series, you may always watch it a second time. The truth is that by the end of last year I was glad that I was done with documenting 1 year in the life of a part-time hermit. Especially the final push to edit just took a lot of time. I had roughly 150 hours of material. Just to go through those hours once and edit them into usable bits took forever. I'm not complaining, but it was work and I was glad when it was finally done. So for the first 7 weeks of the new year I did not even touch the camera, and it felt great. We are not made all the same. Some like Martin and other amazing creators on the internet can pull off weekly vlogs. There are some who put out 2 a week, and they stay sane. I would not be able to do this. It stresses me out to know that people are expecting something new at regular intervals. Even if it was just once a month, as some cautiously ventured, it would be another deadline looming over me in a life that can be busy at times and that is dedicated to other things. Filming, as I knew from my journeys, can also change your life in ways I'm not fond of. To illustrate, in the fall I had 2 run-ins with an aspic viper, for the first time in my years spent on the mountain here. And both times I slowly retreated, ran to get the camera, and came back 2 minutes later to find it gone. Same as happened with eagles, woodpeckers, and birds of prey. Now, if I had not wanted to capture them on film, to have what I imagined to be great content for an episode, I would have just sat down and watched these creatures, as when I was a little boy falling first in love with bumblebees, busying themselves on bugle herb. I remember that day and exactly where it was when I decided with a smile that bumblebees were my favorite animal. It is one thing documenting something or someone's life for a project, and another to live your own life through a camera lens. And stranger still, to direct and curate it into what you hope is an attractive, worthwhile package for a viewer's pleasure, with all the added thing of asking yourself why a particular video is doing well and another isn't. Some people can do this with ease. I, however, struggle. The only way I find it manageable is if it has a limited scope, a defined purpose, and an end. And it helps if I can do it without time pressure, and with the option of not releasing it at all if I have doubts about its value. In fact, this very series you just watched almost did not make it to your screens. I was going back and forth on whether I should release it, as I was going through the footage, doing edits and having finished half the episodes. What was still fresh in my mind was the at times exaggerated praise by the Italian audience that had watched my episode on The Pillow. Does what I do give glory to God? Or does lie in it a hidden pursuit of admiration and recognition? What are the potential benefits to a viewer? What are the dangers to myself? I guess things like these always have both benefits and risks. And if only the latter mattered, I would prefer to just keep to myself, laugh with the locals, watch the dragonflies and smell the summer rain. But I know it doesn't. And over the past weeks I've received many messages of gratitude, moving notes and comments encouraging me to pursue this kind of work as a service and see the circumstances to which all of this is owed as a providential grace and a gift not to be squandered. That seems true enough, and I appreciate the positive feedback. Yet I do not want to become an actor in my own life, playing a role that over time might leave me as a shell or fretting over views. I don't want the first thing to think when I see a glorious sunset to be, where's my camera? Oh no, are the batteries charged? Wasn't there a spare somewhere? So if or when I do something again in the future, it has to have a limited scope. It has to have a beginning and an end. I need times in my life where no camera is pointed at me, so as to not lose the joy of sharing other times. The end result has to appear in good time when it is ready. It has to have a story I consider worth telling. It has to be a rounded thing. And I already have ideas that now, after a few weeks of storing the camera away, I'm excited about. At least 4 of them could each be 12 episodes or more. The ideas that may start with scenes on the mountain and updates from the garden, but in a quiet way invite you to places beyond this little patch of land, and end with one of those reflections some of you enjoy. So, this channel, as planned, will go back to being dormant after this Q&A. But from the looks of it, it may not be an eternal slumber. Maybe I'll have something ready by the time Christmas comes around again. If that is of interest to you, and you're currently not subscribed, you may want to click that button and the bell for notifications. Then hopefully YouTube will alert you when finally something stirs again on these pages. Now, something will stir next week, for due to its length, I have split the Q&A into 2 episodes. And I'm excited about the second part next week, because I will actually give the last word, the final reflection, if you will, to someone else, to Marietta, one of my 3 wonderful and talented goddaughters, who is currently a junior at Wyoming Catholic College. While a freshman, she wrote an essay about her first long trip to the wild, a 3-week backpacking trip to the Wind River Mountains with which their school year began. I found it moving, and you might too. All right, on to some other questions you had, in no particular order, though mostly in the order of the episodes under which they appeared. Exception, I put the questions with a decidedly religious topic at the end again, so people have a choice how deep they want to go. Watching Matane and you toil, I witnessed both of you at times groaning, stretching, or wiping your brows, but never once profanity, given the arduous nature of the tasks. How do you do it? In all honesty, I can't speak for Matane, but I, for my part, unfortunately not always manage to transcend all references to technical terms taken from the science of coprology. I'm not proud of that and strive for ever greater control. Why don't you ever hear profanities in the video? Because wisely, if they rarely should occur, they don't make the cut. Here we are back at the reflection of episode 5. Everything is curated. Why do you have Byzantine-style icons? I appreciate the level of abstraction, the symbolism contained in them, and their use in prayer. Most icons you see in the house I painted, or as one traditionally would say, wrote, during my time as a student at the International Theological Institute, where there were also many Eastern Rite Catholics. For what only a few people realize is that the Catholic Church, with its Pope, is actually comprised of 24 churches, in which the Latin Church, the Roman Catholic Church, is but one, albeit the by far largest. Do you sell icons? No. I have in the past, I currently don't. I lack the time for commissions. But on my pilgrimage across the Alps in 2018, one of my discoveries was the richness of votive images. Images that had been brought to a shrine in gratitude by someone who had experienced God's workings in their life. The paintings were often done by second-rate artists, but it is about their testimony. I hope somewhere down the line I may be able to offer to paint votive images for people who request such. But I expect my beard will have to grey a little more before that time and leisure comes. Have you read Guareschi's novels about Don Camillo? Actually, I have not read Guareschi. I've seen the classic films with Gino Cervi and Fernandel, whose parents actually came from a village just a few miles from here. And I've both visited Brescello, the place where the films take place, and Sant'Anna in Trepalle, where Guareschi in fact found inspiration for his character in the real-life parish priest Alessandro Parenti, who shepherded souls not in the Po Valley, but actually in the highest parish of Europe. Why do you light the fire from above? This actually came up a few times. It is very simple. In a bonfire, you light from below because you want everything to light up at once. You want it to be a big fire. In a masonry heater, which you stock with all the wood for a single burn, if you were to light it from below, all of the wood would be set aflame pretty much at the same time. And that creates a problem. To burn hot and clean, you need a lot of oxygen. The more wood is concurrently on fire, the more oxygen you need, maybe more than can be delivered to the burn chamber, leading to a dirty, ineffective burn cycle. A bonfire outside does not have that issue. Wood stoves that you keep feeding usually don't have that issue either. You typically don't fill a wood stove up, but start the fire from under some small pieces and then you add logs as the burn progresses. But efficient clean masonry heaters in which you don't need to maintain the fire over hours are best lit from the top, so the wood burns more progressively. What were the greatest challenges of the restoration? There were and there are many challenges. As I mentioned in one of the episodes, when I was 12, the house I grew up in was partially destroyed in a fire and then rebuilt with, among other things, carpentry done on site. So as an early teen, I was around bricks, table saws, wood workshops, I designed my own room, I was laying floors and roof tiles. That may account in some part for why fixing up a place might not have seemed too daunting when I set out. One challenge, however, I encountered working on this old building was that there are no straight lines or right angles. Sometimes when I spent all the time planning and cutting, I realized too late that I had not considered one particularly crooked aspect and had to improvise. I guess better planning would also have eliminated this, but I tend to move rather quickly from paper to the real thing. Are you an Orthodox priest or a Catholic priest? I'm a Roman Catholic priest. Are there videos of your pilgrimage hikes? Yes, there are 2 available on the platform Projector. The Jerusalem film is very silent, and the Via Alpina Sacra is a more typical travel doc with music and talking bits. How did you become interested in owning a home and having your small farm? Was it something that naturally came to you in connection with your lifestyle as a hermit priest, or was having your own place on earth with a little garden, a hand-built oven, and the whole homesteading also an interest from the beginning? Well, as a priest, you enter a service in which your ideas and plans are shaped by the necessities of the calling and the needs of the faithful. So, 20 years ago, I would have never thought I would own a house or a garden in the Italian Alps or anywhere else. And 20 years from now, it may be a distant, happy memory of a period in my life where it was a gift given for a time. Initially, when I looked for a hermitage, I was not looking to buy one, but just to find a place of relative solitude for a few years. I'd contacted a village council in the Abruzzo, where there was a beautiful hermitage, Madonna dell'Altare. Back then, it was not serviced by a priest. And I would have gone there and rented it if I'd heard back from the council, but I didn't. Until 2 months later, when I received an excited email that they wanted to meet me. They were sorry, but my email had landed in the spam folder. But in the meantime, I had bought this little place in the north of Italy. My reason for buying something in the end was the thought that after my time was up, after 3 years possibly, I could try and sell the place, having fixed it up a little, which effectively made it cheaper to own than to rent the place. You could say I had enough money for such an investment, but I did not have enough money to not care spending it on rent that I would never see again. I hope that makes sense. Do you take helpers like Martin? Not really. I'm not in a building phase where this would be interesting for people to check out. If I got to spend more time here in the summer months, I could offer people silent retreats, but currently, by the time a new year rolls around, the next summer is usually booked up with work and projects. Maybe when my beard has grayed a little more. I count a lot on my beard graying. What role does the work on the property play in your life? I think I mentioned in episode 1 that manual work for me is about balancing the work on the computer. I don't experience it as a necessary chore. I really enjoy it. It's good to work with your hands. What brand of work trousers do you wear? Well, I don't know. Just something from the hardware store. There's one thing, however, I learned from Martin. I got suspenders. I think suspenders are great. It's one of the things that I owe to the Dutchmen. Johannes, can you live indefinitely as a hermit, or is your stay more uncertain, and is a more successful YouTube channel making it more or less certain you can stay? Initially, as I explained, I asked for and was allowed 3 years. As the 3 years came to a close, I asked my bishop if he would be content with me staying on. He was, and there was no time limit imposed at that time. Now, my bishop has turned 75 last year, and as customary at that age, he was retired. And I will see who the next bishop is going to be, and if I can convince him of the value of my work, which of course goes beyond this place and makes me a part-time hermit rather than a true hermit. As for success on YouTube, I don't think that is a criteria determining my future. Does it hurt if I can point to people finding my online work helpful? Probably not. I would like to know how you decided to live this way. Were you called by God? What was your life like before the life you have now? I think the January episode chronicles the important part of how and why I ended up here, unless you mean my life before becoming a priest. I've been a priest for almost 20 years. I was ordained when I was 26, and I'd been preparing for a life as a priest both academically and in formation since I was 19. So there was a life before that, and one before my taking up an active life of faith at the age of 16. The question of a call, of course, comes up in all of this, but I'm of the persuasion that the most important call was uttered some 2,000 years ago, and it is perfectly reasonable to respond to the echo of that call that reaches us through the ages. So I was not asking for some signs in the clouds to gain certainty. I think it's more simple. Consider your choices, make a good one, and stick with it. Johannes, what order of priest are you? Cistercian? You wear a black alb. I'm not sure. I'm a diocesan priest, meaning I'm a priest like Father Bob from the parish down the road, and not from a religious order or monastery. If you see me in a black thing called a cassock, this is the normal attire for priests. Well, until Father Bob from down the parish went all fancy and wanted to wear a tie some 50 years ago. I don't like ties. I'm not good at ironing shirts like those black ones that priests may also often wear. So I just wear what priests used to wear. Maybe because I'm lazy, maybe because I like skirts. A short interjection. There were a few things that were not questions but suggestions and tips. I saw them while going through the comments looking for questions, and thank the kind contributors. There's always something one can learn, like about the spores of ferns or potato peels. As for concerns of safety and safety gear, that is usually a fair remark. We humans do things thinking it will be fine, and it is fine 99 times until it goes wrong once. Then looking for those safety glasses a little longer or postponing work for a good reason would really have paid off. I understand. And yet, like most, I don't always act in accordance with better judgment. Some of the advice may also be meant well, but would actually have its answer in the context not known to the one giving it, and then it is still fair to write it in the comments. If it doesn't help me, it may help someone else reading the comment. Don't you want a dog or chickens? I grew up with horses, dogs, cats. No chickens though. I think it was because the rooster went after my older sister once when she was still little. I would love to have animals beyond the pond, but they are a responsibility, one that I cannot properly take on given my schedule. I did enjoy visiting Martin's chickens in his absence. They have character. And when one of the neighbors, Stefano, comes up in the warmer months with his 5 dogs, I'm happy to join them for a walk and throw sticks for the border collie Blackie to its heart's content. Border collies are just brilliant. Then there were some bee questions. Would you like to keep bees? In principle, yes, I would like to. But I'm reluctant for 2 reasons. First, I do appreciate the wild bees I have here and I don't want them to be crowded out. Second, I'm not here all the time. Like with other animals, bees would deserve my care and attention. I cannot provide that for crucial months of the year when they swarm, for example, and thus I have to abstain from keeping them until my life changes. Where are the honeybees from that can be seen in the videos at times? In June, when the chestnuts flower, beekeepers bring hundreds of beehives into the valley for chestnut honey, and some bees make it all the way up to my garden. Last year, as I saw them very late in the season, I suspect that maybe one of them had swarmed and had been living in a hollowed-out tree or something. What about the orange bumblebee? It was not named. I don't recall the episode off the top of my head, but I do recall the orange bumblebee, because its tribe was very present last year and I just couldn't figure out what it was named. Some of the things in the episodes did not get named because they were named shortly before, some things I forgot by accident, and some things I simply did not know, like the orange bumblebee. I have a hunch, but the morphology was so varied from the standard that I was not sure. If I was right in my assumptions that it was a darker and more orange variant of the moss carder bee. Are you familiar with the Catholic land movement? I am familiar with Chesterton's 3 Acres and a Cow, as part of distributism, now often called localism. And I've met Catholics who went into organic farming and regular Catholic farmers who are still out there. But I'm not familiar with the Catholic land movement as an organization or a movement, if that is meant by the name. But nothing wrong with moving to the land and living an honest life. You are a speaker? What do you speak on? I speak a lot. Just look at this Q&A. And I speak to the lizards and to myself. But when I'm booked as a speaker, it is usually on the subject of my pilgrimages, which I recount with some humor to secular audiences. You can see one such speaking engagement at the beginning of episode 2, for example. This is what pays my bills. And of course, I also speak on religious topics at religious events and gatherings. Have you ever been to Mount Athos? I actually walked past the peninsula in 2014. A few months prior, I had met an Athos monk in Jerusalem who behaved rather aggressively towards me and my idea of visiting Athos on my way home. After my rather innocent question about any advice he had, he turned to a third person and explained that they only tolerated a certain number of heretics like me on Athos at any given time, and I would certainly be forbidden to celebrate Mass, even privately in my room. I know he was maybe not representative for all monks present there, but to me it seemed not good to hoist my presence on people who apparently did not want me there. There is a lot of inherited hate in Greece towards Catholics, most of it cultivated and passed down over generations, since 800 years ago the Latins sacked Constantinople, which, while certainly horrible and with inexcusable crimes, has actually more complex historical circumstances than most of those who rightly bewail the fact know or care about. For example, few know that it was all instigated not by the West, but an Eastern claimant to the Byzantine throne. But that is a whole other story. So, I've not been to Mount Athos and I've no intention of going, but I hear it is easier for laymen than for priests to visit, and I'm sure it's a unique experience. Are there bears where you and Martin live? Recently a lynx was reported, and wolves of course are present, and lizards, but bears are not commonly known to frequent this particular corner of the Alps. They have been reintroduced in other regions like the Trentino, and sadly one of these bears killed a jogger last year. Do you hear Martin's construction work where you live? From bird's eye view, it seems really close. No, we actually don't hear each other. We are maybe a mere 300 yards apart for the birds, but there is a steep ridge between us and thus no acoustic connection. So if I party hard to Gregorian chant, Martin can sleep peacefully. Are there any plans to publish a book in hardback or softback and in English? I was in talks with 2 publishing houses, but for one the timeline was too long and the other is uncertain because it will not receive submissions until summer. So I have recently decided to use KDP print on demand. So the Ireland to Italy book should be available on Amazon at some point before the summer. I'm sorry that it is taking so long, but I just have so much else going on. May I ask, if it is not too personal, are you from Germany, Switzerland or Austria? That is very personal. No, not really. I'm Austrian. I lived in Switzerland for 2 years, in Liechtenstein for 9, and over the last 7 years on my speaking engagements have traveled Germany extensively. And there are many absolutely beautiful places and sites in Germany and wonderful, friendly people. Something many Austrians are actually unaware of. For as a small nation next to a similar but very big nation, we tend to underline what makes us different so as not to be subsumed under the same label and preserve our distinctive Austrian identity. I wonder, Johannes, why Catholic? Does one even have to associate with a church in order to live spiritually? This is a very good question, and it came up in different forms quite frequently in the comments I've seen under the videos. I think it deserves a proper answer, and it might fashion a great cycle of reflections for one of the ideas I'm hoping to develop. I understand if you don't have time to continue these long videos, but could you maybe upload just a reflection once a week after the series has ended? I think English has so much great Catholic content, and my input would add little of significant value. So if you're looking for thoughts to engage with, here are some suggestions. And before I name them, I do not mean that I will always agree with everything every one of these people say, and you might not either. But they are certainly worthwhile to explore. If you're a non-believer but a geek and interested in philosophy, then check out the History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps podcast. It's not Catholic, it's not Christian, but it is certainly interesting. Peter Adamson, professor of philosophy at the LMU in Munich and at King's College in London, has produced over 500 chronological episodes on the history of philosophy. He may not always go to the necessary depth on a particular subject, but it is an incredibly rich summary, going even beyond the West to Islam, India, Africa. I have not listened to all the episodes, but those I have, I enjoyed. Even though, on account of my particular training, I may differ on some of the interpretations given. If you want a simple primer in Thomistic philosophy, which is where I have my home, check out the Thomistic Institute. They have a 96-part illustrated animated Aquinas 101 series, and I recommend also the 47-part Science and Faith series, which features Catholic scientists and Dominican friars who hail from Harvard, Yale, Brown, CIT, Stanford, you name it. If, on the other hand, you are a believer or call yourself spiritual and appreciate conversations about the faith and want to hear a Catholic perspective on the world, then Bishop Robert Barron and his Word on Fire have built up a great library of podcasts and YouTube videos that may build a bridge on certain topics. In fact, I recommend looking up his videos that are 10 years old, because when he was a priest and before he became a bishop, he mused mainly on contemporary movies and how they related, sometimes unexpectedly, but ever insightful, to timeless themes and truths. He also produced the visual 10-part Catholicism series, which may acquaint you with the richness of Catholic art and experience. Again, I have my disagreements with Bishop Barron on certain theological topics, but that does not mean I do not find much to appreciate. If, on the other hand, you have a particular love for Scripture and want to explore Catholic perspectives on the Bible, the first name that comes to my mind is Scott Hahn and his St. Paul Center. If you like a deep, pleasant voice, you'll tune in just to hear the man speak. He used to be a Protestant minister, so he understands where many Christians in other denominations come from. And he did not become rabid after his conversion, hating on what he had been. He just realized more and more that all the good things he had known to be true found an even deeper fulfillment in the traditions preserved in a church that had deep roots all the way back to the 1st century. This personal journey was beautifully chronicled in the 1993 book Rome, Sweet Home, in which one of the particular great things is that he and his wife Kimberly wrote alternating chapters describing their different yet eventually converging paths. I highly recommend it. But even if you're not interested in his personal story, you will find his podcast and insights into Scripture edifying whether you are Catholic or not. Then again, if you are Catholic, but more nominally so and without much knowledge of the religion you were born into, check out Father Mike Schmitz and Ascension Presents. He also does the hugely successful Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year podcast. It may surprise you to discover the faith you were handed on anew or really for the first time. Lastly, if you're a fervent Catholic and you think tradition is the best thing since the invention of yogurt, you surely don't need any recommendations from me. You will have scoured the internet for any and all sources that enrich your life. Just allow me one piece of advice. Above all, and especially in the trials of difficult times, patience and charity. Will you plant just lemons or other citrus trees? I actually cultivate many different cold-resistant varieties of citrus. The Meyer lemon is great, but my tiny Satsuma Okitsu, on which I let one fruit mature last year, proved super delicious, and it may be my favorite citrus now. May I ask, would you have any advice on building a loggia like yours? I'm not sure what advice exactly would be of service to you. Much depends on the particular situation. Can it be a permanent structure, or does it need to be removable? If it is to be permanent, then you want to have some shading, otherwise it will get very, very hot in the summer. If it is to be removable, well, then it will probably determine the materials. It would rule out glass, for example, which is too heavy and risky to handle. For optics, you might want a glass-like but UV-stable material that will not yellow. This probably will lead you to acrylic glass, sometimes called plexiglass, which is a particular brand. It is more expensive than other options, but in my opinion the best compromise between weight, characteristics and durability. The only downside of acrylic glass is that you do not want to scratch it during cleaning, so just follow the instructions for the material. And this sensitivity, of course, may rule it out for deserts where there's a lot of sand and friction. As for the mechanism I use to detach the acrylic glass, I hope to record taking it down this year and include it in a future channel update. That will make it easier to understand the basic system that I implemented. Would it affect your thought if you eschewed the language of man and mankind, do you think? Asking as a not-Christian female human. Well, English is not my first language. It has been shaped by the books I've read. Many of these classics come from a time when these considerations, some of which don't even exist or translate into other languages, were foreign to both male and female speakers and writers, few of whom, I guess, would have understood or favored such deconstructions along the battle lines of postmodern gender identity factions. Language is something ever-evolving, but it is also something received. I don't mind it evolving, even though it may evolve beyond my customary parlance, for which I ask your patience if that is required. But I'm also skeptical when committees of ideologues are involved. Such committees are currently distorting my mother tongue, and it is even far more messy in German than in English because grammatical gender is a feature of German and not understood all that well, it seems, by those who see victimization where there is none. But sorry, that concerns not your question, but the Germans. If you struggle with my wording, think of my thoughts like listening to an old grandfather. You may speak differently from him, but you probably won't try to teach new tricks to an old pony. But it would also be somehow sad if that was the reason you stopped talking to your grandfather altogether. Okay, so much for regular questions. The disclaimer, we are getting into the theological ones. I have 3 questions to round out this video. on feeling God, on loving God, and on why I became a priest, which really is more an explanation of what a priest actually is. First, I do not believe in God, but I do know that I have a God-shaped hole. I'm very interested to know how God makes you feel. Does he make you feel like you have someone who is aware of you? Do you feel accountable to him? To be honest, for me, it is not so much about feeling God. It is about knowing God and then the will being drawn to the goodness of that which is known. Feelings have their place. They may be fostered and evoked by the knowledge or accompany it, and I can relate to the feelings you describe, but feeling is not the origin or source of faith. Grace works by giving light to reason and strength to the will. It does not require a third faculty, but elevates those faculties such as reason and will that are natural to man. Light and strength are maybe how you experience God, if that can be called an experience. But to be sure, it is not God himself that you can then see in that light. Our mind is too feeble. To loosely quote C.S. Lewis, I don't believe in the sun because my eyes can really see it. It is too bright to allow me to look at it. Rather, I believe in the sun because by its light I can see everything else. Second, if love is willing and doing the good of the other, how does man love God? For God is goodness itself. There is no lack or way to add goodness to goodness itself, it would seem. Can man be said to do God's good? I can see I'm to love my brother as in willing and doing what is generally best for him, regardless of myself. But doing what is best for God? So do we love God by analogy only? Great question. We could address it by distinguishing the three types of love which already the Greeks spoke of: philia, eros, and agape. Philia being friendship, eros having a sexual nature, and agape being a spiritual kind of disinterested love. It is easy to see how agape might fit what we are looking for when we are speaking of the love for God. But the classic definition of love, which is willing the good of the other, is not in conflict with agape. While, as you point out, willing the good of the other is easy to see with our fellow man, who might be lacking some good or could lose it, willing the good of God is still applicable, yet in a different way. Willing God's good is not willing for anything he is missing in himself, but willing for everything to truly participate in his goodness as God desires. So you're not willing something God is lacking in himself, but that his goodness be recognized and realized by his creatures so that they glorify him. Willing God's good is loving what God loves. That is why Scripture does not separate the love of God from the love of neighbor. You cannot love God and hate your neighbor, because God loves that neighbor too. Think of 1 John 4:20. Aquinas has more things to say on loving God, some of which are surprising. For the Greeks, for example, friendship, philia, was only ever really possible between equals, between those who share a profound similarity, which is why people have thought there could not be true friendship between God and man, because there is absolutely no equality. But Aquinas, taking the words of Christ, "I no longer call you servants but friends," as crucial, realized how radically grace transforms man and makes him a participant in the divine life, in what the Fathers daringly call divinization, which is a long cry from the pessimistic view of the Reformers of the total depravity of man and justification being a mere external act as Luther understood it. But we do not need to go there at this point. I hope both the classic definition of love I used in the episode as well as the remarks on friendship illustrate how we truly can love God, and not just by analogy, even though our love will always be limited to the measure possible to a creature and not correspond to the reality of the Creator. 3. The priesthood. Would you be able sometime to relate how you came to be a priest and why? All right, let me begin with a primer on what a priest is and then what a Catholic priest is in particular, or contradistinction. Priests in general exist in many cultures and religions. They are typically mediators between God and men. They may be such because they belong to a certain caste, they may have acquired special learning and insight, or they were elected by the deity itself, or because they have the necessary training in cultic ritual. That is how priests typically became priests, and how they were understood across cultures in their function as mediators between God and man, and tasked with the sanctification of the people. That was their job. Israel had such a priesthood, and some would argue it was in a way the result of a failure to live up to a greater promise from the beginning of Exodus, when the whole people of God was called to be a people of priests. The priesthood of Aaron may still have existed for some specific functions, but the whole people, if they had not rebelled in the desert and made the golden calf, may have had a more important share in the sanctification of the world. So in a way, the promise remained unfulfilled until one day it will be fulfilled with the coming of the Messiah, with the new Exodus. Christians believe that day came with Christ, who indeed is the one and only high priest of the new covenant. Why is he the only priest, and no more priests like of old are required? Because he, the God-man, is indeed the perfect mediator between God and man, who did not sin and was not conquered by death, but lives and reigns and officiates as high priest in all eternity. And all those that are joined to him have a share in his one and only priesthood in order to sanctify the world. His disciples who seek his will have become that people of priests that have been promised and are called to exercise their priestly office to mediate God into the world through love, healing, and good works born from grace. All right, I think many Christians, regardless of their denomination, are on the same page up to this point. But what then is a priest like myself? If Catholics believe in the singular priesthood of Christ and the common priesthood of all, what then are those men in their ranks that are called priests? And to be sure, this regards not only Catholics, but all churches whose history goes back to the apostles, such as the Orthodox, the Armenians, the Syrians, the Chaldeans, the Copts, and so on. They all have fundamentally the same understanding of the priesthood, a sacramental priesthood. So, what is the sacramental priesthood? To understand this, we need to understand that God communicates his grace through visible signs. He does not do so because he has to, but because he knows well the creatures that he had made. God can, in his power, sanctify anyone and at any time, and he may do so, and yet he chose signs such as baptism to infuse his grace. He does so fittingly because man is a physical creature, and having tangible, visible actions is helpful to a creature that cannot behold invisible grace. That is why the Church, from its early days, followed the command to baptize, to anoint, to celebrate the Eucharist, to pronounce forgiveness in order to restore someone who has fallen, and more. Now with Christ, the old priesthood ended, because Christ was the new perfect eternal high priest. And with his perfect sacrifice on the cross, the old sacrifices ended that had in reality foreshadowed the one perfect sacrifice on the cross. Yet, so Christians of old believed, Christ did not content himself having performed the supreme salutary act, but instituted among the other sacraments that dispensed his grace even a living monument to that sacrifice at the Last Supper, from which the graces of his redeeming act would continue to flow to his followers and sanctify them in a more visible way. Again, this was not necessary, but it is fitting. The God who is eternal and ever-present acts now and not simply in the past. The Eucharist is not a dead memorial of a past action we recall as we do with important anniversaries. Rather, the early Church emphasized, following the words of Christ himself, that he would be truly present under the gifts of bread and wine, becoming his body and blood. A separate consecration signified a separation of Christ's body and blood on the cross. But if Christ, as the one sacrificed, is truly present in the Eucharist, would it not seem fitting that he also be present in some other form as the one sacrificing? And this is where the sacramental priesthood comes in. The priest is not a priest in addition to Christ, the only high priest. He is not a priest apart from the priesthood of Christ. In his ordination, the sacramental priest is configured to Christ so as to represent him in those acts in which Christ is in truth the one acting. The priest at Mass does not say, "This is his body," but "This is my body." For in this moment he is sacramentally representing Christ, giving himself. He lends his being and voice to the one who is not only the sacrificial victim on the altar of the cross, but also the one true priest offering it for our sins. What does this mean? Like bread and wine are set apart and sanctified, so the priest is set apart and sanctified through his ordination. He remains a mere man, but he is ordained to participate in the one priesthood of Christ in order to represent him who is the actually acting agent in those sanctifying actions, Christ. The moments in which the priest is most and truly priest, he is least himself, but merely acting in persona Christi. That is why the sacramental priesthood is limited and tied to actions in which Christ confers his grace through visible signs. It is not a status that confers power to the priest to be wielded as he wishes or to elevate himself above others. I understand this explanation might be a bit foreign to someone from a Protestant theological tradition, but it sheds light on the difference of the sacramental priesthood of the apostolic churches to Protestant ministry. Protestant ministry is an office that you can pursue, learn, take up, lay down. It is a profession you choose, and its success and efficacy is not just a question of grace, but very much a question of competency, intellectual brilliance and honesty, scriptural knowledge, insight, and a good moral character. The priesthood is not. The priesthood is the church ordaining a fallible man, knowing full well that he is a fallible man. To do what? To be. To represent Christ sacramentally in certain actions, so that through his sacramental representation, God indeed acts in this world, not by necessity, but by his choosing. The priest is a sinner and will fail, but his success is not tied to his own person, to his own holiness, but to him who acts through him. When I represent Christ in the words of consecration, Christ acts, and thus, when I distribute communion, people receive not according to the measure of my holiness, something that I produced, but they receive Christ according to the fullness of Christ. They receive the whole Christ, and not just a little portion depending on the competency of the priest. Which brings us to another difference between Protestant worship and worship in the apostolic tradition. Protestant worship consists of praise, song, and pleas rising from the congregation up to the heavens towards God, beseeching his mercy, which he kindly bestows. Catholics know this form too, because it is essentially just a kind of prayer. But Catholic worship is sacramental and completely Christ-centered. It revolves around Christ sacramentally present in the priest and in the gifts on the altar. It revolves around Christ giving himself to the Father. It is but a participation in the liturgy of the heavenly Jerusalem, which in every moment consists in the Son giving himself to the Father completely, in the Spirit that is the love between the Father and the Son. Catholics assemble in church not so much to offer God something of their own making, or prayer, or song, or to be instructed, all of which, of course, has a space and prepare the soul. But Catholics who understand their faith come as members of the mystical body to ever unite themselves more to the head, which is Christ, so that in, through, and with Christ they are taken up into the divine life of the living God. Because eternal life is not something in the future, but something that has begun in baptism, in which the connection to Christ was established, and which, from then on, should only ever grow more deeply and be nourished by the means that Christ provides in the sacramental life. So why did I become a priest? That's why. Not because I think myself holier or a religious expert or better, wiser or more learned or more compassionate or more Christian than others. I'm not a professional Christian. There are many husbands and wives that are much holier than me, because their love of God is greater than mine. I became a priest to give myself to Christ, so that in those limited moments that he ordained in the order of his own dispensation of grace, he can use my mouth to say his words and use my hands to give himself to his faithful. That is my chief service to others. I may have other gifts and talents which, like everyone, I ought to use for the glory of God. But they do not make me a priest. I am a priest through participation in the one priesthood of Christ, in which everything you may receive comes not from me, but from Him. Now why would God, who does not need any of us, want us to share so sublimely in His work? Here is the answer to the mystery of the Church, and a testament to the unfathomable goodness of God.
Got far already.
Yeah, it was not that. The biggest one was on my side. There was a big chestnut that fell onto another chestnut, breaking off the branches.
Oh wow.
It's still hanging in there, and if we get another half meter next weekend,
Yeah.
then more is gonna come down.
True. Yeah, I want to come with the car so we could go all the way down to clear everything, but
I think it should be clear from once this is clean, then everything should be